Hey, welcome everybody. This is the first time that we're doing in person and Zoom. So hopefully this is going to work. Otherwise, please excuse all the technical difficulties that may or may not arise. But we're going to try to look at the real people and the real people who are somewhere else, but also here with us. So I'm very excited to welcome everyone to this class on the Talmud. And I think we have here people I know that went to yeshiva, right? People that went to rabbinical school, and we have our people that perhaps have never opened a Talmud in their lives. Really people from all different sorts of backgrounds. So we're gonna hopefully, no matter where you come from and what your background's like, hopefully you're gonna learn something new today and learn something that you didn't know before. And we're gonna jump right in by showing a video. Just gonna make sure that it's gonna display to everyone here, but we're gonna jump right
at
in.
100%. All right,
And we're gonna just mute everybody that's on Zoom so the video could be heard, including myself. Continue. Can the people on Zoom hear the video? Okay, perfect. Now we'll go.
March 3rd, 1240, was a Shabbat. But for the harassed Jews of medieval France, numbering as many as 100,000 souls, it was not to be a day of rest, but of unprecedented unrest. They were praying in their synagogues when the raid began. In cities and towns throughout the kingdom, agents of King Louis IX of France burst through the doors of Jewish houses of prayer and seized thousands of hapless prisoners. All the detainees were transported to Paris, where they were held in convents under strict guard to await their trial on accusations of grave crimes. For 3 long months, they languished in captivity until their collective trial began. Meanwhile, the Jews of the kingdom gathered continuously to storm the heavens on their behalf with fasting and prayer. 4 of the greatest luminaries of the French Jewish community, led by the highly respected Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, served as the prisoners' legal defense. Following the trial, the judges continued to debate the case for another 2 years, while European Jewry held its breath. Finally, in June of 1242, 24 wagons and tightly packed convicts rolled into Place de Grève, causing the Jews of France to emit a collective groan of horror. Place de Grève was a public square along the banks of the Seine River, notorious as the historic site of public executions, hangings, beheadings, and burnings at the stake. Throngs of Parisians lined the streets to enjoy the spectacle, while those of the Jewish faith remained hidden, terrified to venture from their homes. The prisoners had been found guilty and had been sentenced to extermination through public burning. The evil verdict was carried out with glee. But as they were consigned to the flames, there were no cries of agony or despair, nor was there a smell of burning flesh, because the prisoners were not people. They were books, thousands upon thousands of handwritten scrolls and codices, every copy of the Talmud that the king's agents could find in France, almost all of which had been sheltered in the nation's synagogues, had been arrested, put on trial, and condemned to public burning. The Jewish tradition was consigned to the fire that day, and as angry flames roared at their ancient wisdom, as their teachings rose as ash, and an inferno ingested their spiritual treasures, the Jewish communities of France were singed with grief and flung into mourning. For their executed pages, for their martyred beliefs.
All right. What a video. I don't know if any of you saw that reveal coming, but we chose to start with that video to sort of set the tone about what we're going to do right now, what we're going to discuss. The Talmud, which is books. I actually put out a few for those of you who are here in person. I put out a few of my Talmuds right here on the table. And you can see I have the rest of my set right over there. You could show it on the screen here. But on the bottom left, you see I have a whole bunch of Talmud books. It's a book. And here we have the story, how this book was so hated by the enemies of the Jews at the time that they,
Even now.
and now, as we'll see in a moment, that it was thrown to the flames. In fact, if you open up your books or handouts to page number 3, you'll see there a poem or a eulogy. This is a poem that was composed by a mayor of Rottenburg. You'll see his he has his bio is on the side, and he wrote a poem. I'll just read a few lines. I will shed tears until they surge like a stream. They will reach the graves of noble princes Moses and Aaron. And the poem goes on to say, in the last couple of lines, in the city square, like a penalty of a Jewish city that strayed to idolatry, they burned the supreme treasure. This was a liturgy, a eulogy that he wrote to describe his feelings when he witnessed the burning of the Talmud. Now, you know, this poem for the past 800 years is recited every single year by Jewish people on the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is the day which we mourn the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So on that day that we mourn the destruction of the temple, we also mourn the burning of the Talmud. So the Talmud, which is a book you all came here to learn about, has had such a presence and importance to the Jewish people that its burning was felt so deeply that we mourn it, even though today we have the Talmud. Spoiler, there were copies of the Talmud that were not in France, so they weren't able to completely destroy it. We still feel it's that action, that event was so traumatic for us that we still talk about it till today. And the question is, which we all want to know, is what is the Talmud? What's its secret? But more than that, the Talmud it wasn't just about the fact that it was burned. Let's talk about the positive for a second. A Talmud and a Jew has been so intertwined that throughout Judaism revolves around Talmud. That would not be an exaggeration. All of our quirks, our customs, our comedy, many Jewish comedians could trace their comedy to the Talmud, right? I'll tell you one, because why not? A kid comes home from school and his mother tells him, close the door, it's cold outside. And the kid says, he just came back from Talmud class. He says, and if I would close the door, it wouldn't be cold outside. Right? Did you get it? Okay, we'll learn some Talmud, you'll get that joke. But the point is, the Talmud has developed a unique way of thinking. It has its own language. It has its own hand motions, right? If you ever walk into a room where people are studying Talmud, they're shaking back and forth like I'm doing right now out of habit. They'll twiddle their thumbs. They'll be using words. It has its own language. It has its own tune. There's a tune how to read the Talmud. We even have a recording of someone recording it as far back as I believe it's from 1920, a tune that's used till today. So the Talmud isn't just a book. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of life. It's not a book that you could just read. You can't take this book. Here, let me take one. Give me 1 second. Let me just fix that
Bring
screen.
them back.
Told you we'll have technical difficulties. Here we go. This is a book of the Talmud for those watching online. And you can't just read this book. First of all, because it's very heavy, right? So you can't just sit on the couch and read it. But this is a book that has to be studied. It's not something that you lean back and just casually browse through. It's a book of study. It's an experience. And the truth is, it's the secret of survival of the Jewish people. And this is not something that I made up. It's someone else made it up. And we'll read it. Text number 3. So for those of you, it's the first time that's attending a JLI class. We have several different texts in the book, in the student book, and I usually ask one of the students to read it. So Steve, could you read for us text number 3? It should be on page 6. And read it for us, and hopefully those online could hear it. If not, just read along. Page number 6.
The importance in Jewish life of the Talmud is not by any means purely academic. It comprises the accumulated wisdom of the Jewish people over many generations. The periods of its reaction coincide with the growth of independent centers of life in far distant regions cut off politically and linguistically from the former nuclei. The Jewish people was about to enter on an entirely different phase of its being in countries of which their fathers had never heard, in the face of difficulties hitherto unimaginable, but they possessed to bring with them into their new existence a code not merely of religion or law, but of civilization. The Talmud gave the Jew a fatherland which he could carry about with him when his own land was lost, and if he was able to maintain his identity in the course of long centuries to come under conditions such as no other people had ever been able to surmount, it is with the Talmud above all that the credit lies.
Thank you, Steve. So there we have it. That's from Cecil Roth, a British Jewish historian, and he wrote this in 1948. And he puts it very succinctly how the Talmud is a secret of Jewish survival. I like the way he says, it gave the Jews a fatherland. It gave us something that we call home. It's not a piece of land, it's not a piece of real estate, but it gave them an identity. And in fact, in Jewish life, we never really had any military heroes. If you look through Jewish history, we have military heroes, but not that many. We definitely didn't have any athletes, right? You could count how many Jewish basketball players there are on all your 10 fingers. Forget about football players or baseball players. I mean, I think we're getting better, but maybe not. I don't know. But what were the heroes of Jewish history throughout the ages? Talmudic scholars. Scholarship was prized. When it comes to Nobel Prizes, we're about 23%. So we are winning in something. Scholarship, and specifically Talmudic scholarship, was always prized by the Jewish people. And I skipped text too. I'll just read it quickly from Psalms. Had your Torah not been my delight, I would have perished in my suffering. I will never forget your precepts, for through them you preserved my life. King David discussing the study of Torah. So what is this Talmud? Now that I got you all excited, hopefully, to find out about what the Talmud is, that's what we're going to spend the next 6 weeks doing. And tonight, we're going to discover the first lesson. We're going to give a brief overview of what the Talmud is, and I'll give it away. It's mostly laws, and we'll discuss what type of laws, why is that law important, why is it taking up so much of our time. Next week, we'll learn about the first part of the Talmud called the Mishnah, what that is. If that word is unfamiliar to you, I'll explain it next week. The next 3 lessons, 3, 4, and 5, will be all about the Gemara. Again, I'll explain what that is in a minute. And finally, the last lesson will be how the Talmud affects Jewish life till today. But tonight, we're going to talk about what the Talmud is. What is the Talmud? But before we do that, if you could turn to page 8 in your student book. We're just going to say 10 facts about the Talmud. We're going to go through them really quickly, and no need to memorize them now, but just to give you some familiarity with as we continue and we throw some terms around, just so you should know what we mean. So number 1, I'll read them quickly if you'll indulge me. The Talmud is a combination of 2 books, the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah is a book of laws, and the Gemara, the latter, starts as a commentary, elaboration, and analysis of the former. So two books, the Mishnah and the Gemara. If you didn't understand what that means, we're going to explain that. The Mishnah, the first book, was composed around 200 CE in northern Israel. Number 3, there are two versions of the Gemara. The first is a Jerusalem Talmud, called the Jerusalem Talmud. Can anyone guess why?
Because it was based in Jerusalem.
Because it was written in Jerusalem. Very good. And the second version was called the Babylonian Talmud, written in Bavel, Babylonia, modern-day Iraq, and that area. The Jerusalem Talmud was completed in the mid-4th century in northern Israel. The Babylonian Talmud, that's what I just said, was completed in the 5th century in Babylonia. Number 5, the Mishnah has the teachings of 120 sages, referred to as the Tanaim. That's their name, the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah. And number 6, the Gemara compiles the teachings of approximately 800 sages, referred to as the Amoraim. Number 7, the Talmud has 63 sections or books, referred to as Masechtot, tractates. Number 8, every tractate contains teachings of the Mishnah, but not every tractate has teachings of the Gemara. Some tractates are treated in Jerusalem Talmud, some in the Babylonian Talmud, and some in neither. Number 9, the universal standard print of the Babylonian Talmud is the 19th century Vilna Shas, which includes several primary commentaries and fills 2,711 double-sided pages. And number 10, we're going to skip number 10 because it's too complicated. We'll get back to it. But these are this is 10 facts about the Talmud.
Go back and say that the Talmud, the Mishnah is the book of laws, and what is the Gemara?
So
The explanation.
Diane Sue just asked, the Mishnah is the book of law, and the Gemara is the explanation
The explanation of
of the law. Exactly.
Why we observe it, how we observe it, and all of the customs involved.
Exactly. Exactly. I told you, we have a Talmudic scholar here.
That's
So-
right, but I wish.
So like, for example, on this page, we have 3 lines. The top 3 lines are the Mishnah. The rest is the Gemara. The rest is all commentary. Don't get overwhelmed. We're going to get back to this page. But this is, and by the way, this book, you notice it's a large page, but the words are very small. And then the actual tractate in this book was only these pages. All this is commentary from different rabbis that refer back to those few lines. But we're going to get to that. So 10 facts about the Talmud. Now we're going to do one more thing before we get into explaining what the Talmud is. We're going to dive into the deep end. Okay? We're going to read 4 different lines from 4 different sections of the Talmud, just one-liners, just to give you a taste, a sample of what the Talmud is. Now, for those of you online, if you have any, first of all, if you have any questions, I'm going to stop every couple of minutes for questions, and feel free to ask. And if you're online, feel free to ask as well. So, but before that, let's just quickly go through these lines, and let's introduce some of our online guests. Bridget, could you read for us text 4A? But you're muted. I'm going to have to ask you to unmute.
Where do you have to?
You muted? You muted
Okay.
everybody.
Now you can hear me.
I can hear you loud and clear. Yes. Go
Great.
ahead.
Okay, time for matzah. On the eve of Passover, we may not eat from close to the time of, how do you say that, mincha? Mincha,
Yes.
until it's dark, to ensure a hearty appetite for eating matzah at the Passover Seder later that night.
Okay, so that was a line from the Talmud. Thank you, Bridget. That was a line actually from the Mishnah. You have the source right on top. Before we go to the next one, is that line very clear or very vague? What do you think? Like, could you make sense of what we just read?
It's pretty clear to me.
Pretty clear. Okay, so who wants to tell me what it said? Isaac, what's the line saying? What's it telling us?
that you should not eat for a certain period of time before dark in order to have an appetite for the matzah that's going to come later that night.
Very good. But after saying that, do we have any questions?
You stop eating.
When do we stop? Jack has a question. When do we stop? It says,
It's fine.
Jacob, Yankel.
Yeah.
Yankel has a question. Yankel says, but when do we stop? What's the exact time? When's the time of mincha? Anyone else has another question? That's already an answer. But
Sorry.
we're gonna stick.
Would it be?
Yeah, we'll find out.
One more question.
What? You see, we're already Talmudic over here. But I have a question. What does it mean you can't eat? Does that mean on the eve of Passover we're supposed to fast? We can't water? Could I drink water? Like, are we supposed to come? Could I have a fruit? Or does it mean like pizza? What does it mean we can't eat? What if, and what if someone has a medical emergency? There's so many questions we could ask on this line. And that's what the Talmud is all about, to explain that line and many other lines. We're actually going to get to this
And
line.
what is close to the time?
What is close to the time? How close is close? An hour, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes,
An hour and a half? 2
maybe an
hours?
hour and a half. Right. Okay. So that is a line from the Talmud. We're going to do three more lines. Jacob, Yankel, can you read for us 4b?
If one hires skilled workers and they deceived each other, they have only a right to complain, but not to pursue a financial claim.
Okay, here's the line. The first line we had was more about Passover. This has nothing to do with Passover. This is a line about monetary laws, about laws, working laws. Isaac, could you read for us text 4c?
All who are obligated to ritually immerse must do so during the day, with the exception of a woman who is a nida or a yoleda, post-menstruation or post-birth, who must ritually immerse at night.
Okay, so here we have a law about ritual immersion. We're not going to explain what that is, but there's laws about immersion. People who become impure, what should they immerse themselves in, known as a ritual pool. That's another law from the Talmud. And finally, then, Sue, could you read for us 4d?
Every Jewish individual has a share in the world to come, as it is stated. Your people are all righteous. They will inherit the land forever. They are the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I take pride.
Okay, so that's a line discussing, it's more of a feel-good type of section from the Talmud. It speaks about how every person has hope. Every person, no matter what they did in their lives, they have a share in the world to come. So that last section, if you notice, was different than the first four. The first four were like laws. The last one's already bordering on philosophy. We actually have a name for it. It's called Agadata. Notice on the screen I have halacha, 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 Agadata. Now, I'm not going to make you squint. If you look on page 9 and on page 11, you have both terms. Page 9, you'll see halacha. That means way or path, and it means Jewish law. And on page 11, you have Agadata, and it means the retelling or the relating. It is the non-legal sections of the Talmud, historical events, contemporary events, interpretations of texts, ethical, spiritual, medicinal, and practical teachings and advices. So we have from the Talmud, the makeup is about 1/4 Agadata, 3/4 halacha, 1/4 homiletics, and 1/4 and 3/4 Jewish law. So what type of laws? So we just took a dive into the Talmud. We just took I think I skipped something here. Did I skip something here? No, I didn't.
No.
Okay. So we just took a law, 4 laws from the Talmud. And my friends, that is what the Talmud is all about. Laws. Law. It is a book of laws. Laws are usually, right, in the United States, we have laws to prevent harm, to define, like, you're not allowed to drive your car into somebody. I'm pretty sure it's a law in the books. There's laws about, obligations to society, taxes. There's laws in the United States about, social interactions, don't follow too close behind someone when you're driving in traffic, right? And the Torah laws are actually more than that. Torah laws also define our religious obligations to God, right? Even behaviors that don't affect others. So like, there's our obligations to God could be prayer, putting a mezuzah on your house, or laws about what's kosher and what's not kosher, or laws about, who could you get married to, special days on the calendar, like the Sabbath and the holidays. There's special Jewish laws that about agriculture, about, how to plant in a way that's according to Torah law, and what do you have to give to the people that are poor. Then there's laws that deal with worship in the holy temple, right? Remember, one of the laws we spoke about was ritual immersion. Those were laws that are mainly today, we don't really do that, because those laws were only around when we had the temple in Jerusalem. There was a large amount of laws that dictated how exactly the service and the different ceremonies were done in the temple. And yeah, we just said purity or impurity. So we have all these different laws that are in Judaism, and that is what the Talmud seeks to explain. And the Talmud is made up of two parts. And if we go back here, we have the Mishnah, the law, and the Gemara, which is the legal analysis. The Mishnah is the law. We're going to discuss more the history in the next lesson. But the Talmud is these two ideas: laws and legal analysis of laws. That is what most of the Talmud is all about. Different kinds of laws. And I'll make one more point before we break for questions. If you're going to ask me, where do all these laws come from? Where is the source of all these laws? No, I'm actually not going to do that. I'm actually first going to tell you the story. There's Jewish laws even about how to tie your shoes. There's a law that when you wake up in the morning and when you tie your shoes, first put on your right shoe, then put on your left shoe, and then tie your left shoe, and then tie your right shoe. And there's an explanation about these laws with intention behind them. You want to honor the right side, just like when you shake a person with the right hand. In Jewish tradition, doing things with the right, stronger hand is a sign of respect. And then when it comes to tying, we want to honor the left side, because tying is sort of like, so these are all laws which have spiritual significance, but the laws of the Talmud encompass every facet of a person's life. It's not just laws that govern what to do if you hit someone with your car. It's laws that govern every facet of your life. There's a story told about an emperor, the legend. They say it was with Emperor Franz Joseph, the ruler, I think the guy that, because of him, we had World War I, if I remember correctly. I may be wrong. But Franz Joseph was once told, he was in his court, one of his advisors was ridiculing the Jews and telling them, these Jews, they have laws. And he told them this story about how to tie your shoes. And he was trying to ridicule the Jewish people. And the emperor stopped him and said, I know you're trying to make fun of them, but actually, I'm actually impressed about these people that their God is not just something which is a once a week, it governs every facet of their lives. But this is what the Talmud is. And of course, the question will be, where does this body of law come from? Who made up all these laws? And why are we studying a book of law? But before we do that, before I continue, does anyone have any questions? Am I talking too fast? Sometimes I speak like a New Yorker. Any questions? I'm from New York. Yeah.
I have a
No
question.
Go ahead, Bridget.
So would you find an actual physical Mishnah all just by itself and a physical Gemara just by itself, and then they happen to pull the two together into these two versions, or are they never individual books, so to speak?
The great question. So, and sort of the answer is yes, they were individual.
Okay,
First of all, just practically, the Mishnah was composed before the Gemara.
that
We'll get
makes
to
sense.
that. But even till today, I have on my shelf a book of the Mishnah, and that's sort of, just an in-depth study of the Mishnah without the Gemara. But the Gemara always has it with it, the Mishnah. So the Mishnah could be separated from the Gemara, but the Gemara always has the Mishnah with it, simply because it's a commentary on the Mishnah. So it needs, in order to be a commentary, it has to have what it's commenting on. But we'll speak about that more. Okay, anyone else online? Very good. I guess you all agree. Good. So we have two questions now. Where does this law come from? You may be asking, we have a book of laws. It's called the Bible. We have the 5 books of Moses. It's pretty long on its own. Why do we need these 23 or 62 books of more laws? Where did that come from? And also, what's all the fuss about a bunch of laws, right? I just started off saying about how they burnt the books and we're so sad, and then we're actually so happy. What's the big fuss? When's the last time any of us sat down and read a book of laws, right? I'm not talking about Jewish law, any law, unless you're a lawyer. If you're not a lawyer, I'm going to guess that the last book of laws you read was before you took your driver's permit test. Am I correct?
Mhm.
Right? No one reads laws. No one reads, even if you're, there's laws how to play football, right? There's laws for everything, has laws, but nobody reads the laws. We rely on the experts. We rely on the contractor learns the zoning law. I didn't even know if the contractors know the zoning laws. How do I think about it? But they should know the zoning laws. And, we leave the mayor and the council to figure out the laws. The average person doesn't study law, right? And even in most, I don't want to delve into other religions, not the focus of tonight's class, but I think Judaism is unique that we have this study of law, which is so important to everyone, not just the rabbis, not just, when I went to school, I went to a yeshiva. Not all my classmates became rabbis. I have classmates that are businessmen, doctors, lawyers, but we all study Talmud. And I would bet that if you go back, anyone in this room and online, if you go to your ancestors, 3, 4, 5 generations back, your ancestors studied Talmud. They got home from work and they studied Talmud, right? There's an image, many people just would study Talmud. They would come home at the end of a long day and open their Talmud, and then they would just fall asleep from exhaustion on their Talmud. They say a story, a pre-Holocaust story, that one of, in a Jew's house, the Polish maid, in the middle of the night, came down to the dining room and opened the book of Talmud and starts looking at the book. And the man of the house wakes up, he hears someone in the dining room, and he goes down and he sees the maid studying Talmud. And he says, "What are you doing? You don't know how to read Hebrew." So she says, "Well, I can't sleep. I was hoping this would help," because she always saw the man of the house falling asleep on it.
Yeah.
So, but they didn't do it because they had to. They were always studying Talmud. But before we get to that question, we have to first discuss where it comes from. That's what we're going to spend the rest of today's class talking about. Where does the law come from, and why has it been so important in Judaism? Am I running on time? I think we're running on time, yes. So here was where we introduce the concept of the oral law. So Judaism, Jewish law, rabbinic law has 2 parts: the written law and the oral law, which is also written. But there's 2 laws, the written law and the oral law. The written law is what we know as the 5 books of Moses, the Bible. That was written down generations ago by Moses at Mount Sinai, and that has been the authoritative text of God's words in Judaism for almost 1,000 years. But if we open up the Bible and start to read the verses, you'll notice right away that it's almost impossible to understand what is God saying, right? We could get the stories, right, of Adam and Eve and Jacob. We can make out the stories, but when it comes to the law part, all the sections that deals with laws, an eye for an eye, an ear for an ear, and all these other examples, we don't actually understand what it means, right? There's actually a book called Living Biblically. It was written not too long ago by a writer from the New York Times, and I think you could look it up, but he wrote a book about how he spent a year, he would do like year-long projects and then write a book about it. So his project was, he was gonna do whatever it says in the Bible, literally. So like, he would just, I haven't actually read it, but I was told it's a very funny book because the adventures he got himself in by just taking the Bible literally was, you know, he would like strap stuff to his head and says, you know, you should have fringes, so he would like walk around with a tablecloth, or you should give money to the poor. So he would be, he makes the point in that book that eventually, if you're just going to take the Bible at its word, you're going to end up making stuff up, because you have to interpret the Bible. You have to take the verse and explain what it means. Well, God was kind enough to give us the explanation. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been fair, right? The explanation is called the oral law. Together, when God gave Moses the 5 books, he also gave him a way to interpret it, a way to translate it. He gave him instructions, how to read this book. So he gave him a book and then instructions how to read the book. The instructions how to read the book are called the oral law. And the oral law has 2 parts to it. But before that, I'll just read a text from Maimonides. Deanne, could you read for us text number 5? It's on page 13. This is a quote from Maimonides, which basically says what I just said, just so you could believe me. You'll see I'm not making it up.
You don't need to read the bottom part.
Yeah, the English part. Unless you want to read the Hebrew part.
Yeah.
I won't stop you. Yeah.
All the commandments were given to Moses at Mount Sinai and recorded in the 5 books of Moses, were presented to Moses along with their detailed explanations that were not recorded in those books. The Torah itself refers to this in its statement. I will give you the tablets of stone and the Torah and the mitzvah. This content, the phrase, the Torah, refers to the written law. The phrase, the mitzvah, refers to the explanation of the written law. It commanded us to fulfill the Torah in accordance with the mitzvah. It is the latter instructions that we refer to as the oral law.
There we go. Thank you, Deanne. So that is the oral law. It's a collection of instructions, and we'll get to it in a minute, how to understand the written law. Now, of course, right away brings the question. So how do we know? I mean, does anyone have a question before I ask the question? You may have the question. It sounds very convenient that the rabbis are telling you that you have to follow the written law the way I tell you to, right? Maybe it should be the way I decide to. And how do we know that the tradition is well, right? The written Torah is written, but once it becomes an oral tradition, how do we make sure that it stays true? And how do we even know that it was told to Moses? That's a great question. Not going to be the subject of tonight's class. It's actually a whole course for itself, maybe a different time, but this is the world which the Talmud operates in, that there's the written law and the oral law, and they're both from God. And what is the oral law? So there's going to be, we'll speak about 3 types of oral law. It's broadly speaking, we could break it down into 3 parts. The first part is we'll call it the received part. What do we mean by received? Meaning that besides for the written law, there is also instructions that Moses received directly from God. So we're going to give an example of matzah. I don't know what matzah is. Matzah is the food that we eat on Passover. We're supposed to eat it at the Seder night. And you know, some people say it tastes great. Other people don't like it, but it's matzah. Where does it say to eat matzah? In the Bible. says you shall eat on the 14th night of Passover, 14th night of day of Nisan, matzah. Well, you know what it doesn't say in the Bible? How much matzah are you supposed to eat? A crumb? What? It doesn't say what is matzah. We're going to get to that in a second. But it doesn't say how much you should eat. So do I eat a crumb of matzah? Do I have to like just eat matzah? So Moses on Mount Sinai actually received instructions. He was told eating means an olive's worth. Hebrew, a kazayat. The volume of an olive. That's how much matzah you're supposed to eat on Passover. Today we eat more than the olive because it's not, when we get to, the Talmud discusses how do you measure an olive, you know, olives shrunk over time. Today, our olive, you know, olives in the cans are not as big as the olives that grow on the tree. So it's about 1 ounce, but that's what was received. So it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah how much matzah we should set. It was an oral tradition. We call this received. Then the next part, number 2, is called derived. So Yankel, Jacob asked a question, what is matzah? So matzah, we know, usually sounds like wheat and flour and water, right? That's what bread is made out of. Now, I don't know if they had rice back in the times of when they left Egypt. I don't know when rice was discovered, but rice wasn't around in the times of the Bible. Rice maybe was brought over from China. Am I correct? It was brought over later, a few hundred years later. They discovered rice, and they discovered that you can make rice into flour. And then the question became, when the Torah says matzah, did it mean wheat flour or rice flour? So God knew that would happen. You can't write instructions for every last scenario. So he gave the sages what's called the 13 rules of how to derive. And through those rules, one of those rules taught the sages that in order for matzah, and what is matzah? Only something that could become leavened bread. That if you mix the flour and the water, it'll rise. If you mix rice flour and water, it won't rise. So from that we infer that rice flour doesn't count to become matzah. Anyone follow what I just said? Should I say it again?
Does that rise unless it has some kind of
Leavening in it.
leavening in it? Yeah.
But if you ever made sourdough bread, so if you make sourdough, that's flour and water, no other ingredients, and it
What's in
rises.
the flour?
Pardon?
What's in the flour?
Plain flour.
Just plain flour.
Plain flour and water. Maybe they make sugar. They add some sugar. I don't know. I don't know how to make sourdough.
Okay.
But flour and water could rise without any yeast. Through a certain, you put in starter, but the starter is also flour and water. Anyone here make sourdough? Maybe someone online? I can't believe in 2024, when you gather together 10 people, someone should have made sourdough. But no, I guess we found the 10 people that don't make sourdough. But that's how they learned that. I don't want to get into the details. I don't want to overwhelm you, but that is an example of something they derived. And then the last section of the law is called legislated. Legislated means that even if there's a need for a law, which it doesn't say in the Torah, but the sages felt the need that in order to keep the Jewish spirit, to keep the Jewish tradition, there's a need that we should legislate a law. God gave the sages the power to do that. And that's actually in text number 6. Tina, I think I see you, Tina. All right. Hi, it's so good to see you. If you could read for us text number 6, if you're up to it, then I'll ask you to unmute. And this is a quote from the Bible.
Let's see, Deuteronomy 17:8-11. If regarding matters of dispute within your local courts, a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over blood, civil law, or lesions, is that lesions? You must
Yeah.
rise up and ascend. to the supreme judge in that era. You should inquire, and they must inform you of the correct verdict in the case. Let's see, you must, whoops, I went too far, sorry. Trying to get back to the screen and this, okay. What page were we on? Sorry. What page were we on? I'm sorry, I messed up my screen here.
Fine, page 14.
14,
On
okay,
four.
good. All right. You must carry the verdict that is announced to you, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. You must act in accordance with the instructions they give you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate to the right or to the left from the rulings that they announce to you.
Okay, so that's a quote from Deuteronomy, which describes the authority Hashem gave to the courts of Jewish law. And it gave them the authority to legislate laws, even when it's not necessarily based on a verse in the Bible. So going back to the matzah, the rabbis instituted that when we eat the matzah, we should do it while reclining. Back in the days, you know, if you look at Romans, they would eat on couches. The royalty would eat on couches. They wouldn't sit like us by a table. So they decreed that on Passover, in order to remember the freedom and to feel the royalty of becoming free, we should eat like kings while reclining. So those are that's an example of the 4 different kinds of laws the Torah has. So if you look at page 15, we have a very organized chart. Put it up on the screen as well. You have laws that are written. For example, eat matzah on the night of Passover. Laws that are received together with the Torah text, a minimum of an olive-sized quantity. Laws that were derived by the sages using hermeneutical methods. Anyone ever heard that word before? Hermeneutical? It's fancy English for the ways that we explain the Torah. And from there we learned that only matzah that could be turned into leavened bread, only flour that could turn bread into leaven can be used for matzah, and then legislated that we should eat the matzah while reclining. And this was the development of the oral Torah. And just time-wise, the written Torah was obviously by Mount Sinai, and then the received Torah was at the same time. The derived part of the Torah came into existence over time as the cases presented themselves, and the sages had to go back and discover how would the Torah treat such a scenario. That's how the derived part of the Torah developed, and that concluded with the Mishnah. And actually, the third part also legislated, that developed mainly and after the destruction of the Second Temple. When the Jews were sent into exile, they enacted a whole bunch of legislation, which came to be known as Rabbinic Judaism, which was designed to ensure the continuance of Torah, and that even in exile, the laws should continue to exist. So they enacted certain legislation. Some legislations, like we said, like to recline while eating the matzah, but other things like to make the laws stricter, to tighten the laws, to make sure that, you know, they called it putting up a fence. They put up a fence so that way, if someone's trying to approach the house, they shouldn't actually get to the house. They'll be stopped by the fence first. So they put up spiritual fences. You know, for example, you not only shouldn't have milk and meat together, you shouldn't even have them in the same meal. Not only like in a sandwich, but like even, you know, 2 bites. That's an example of a rabbinic legislation. This, my friends, is the oral law, which is in the Mishnah. And all of this law, it's all binding. It's all part of the covenant that God made with the Jewish people. Let's look at text number 8. Text number 8 says, if you listen to my voice carefully and observe my covenant, you will be a treasure to me from among the nations. And the people respond in unison. They proclaim, all that God has spoken, we will do. So the Jewish people made a covenant with God that we will follow his laws. What laws? All of the above. all of those laws, the written Torah and the oral Torah, are all part of the covenant we have from God to keep. And those are the laws that the Talmud discusses. And they're all considered the laws that God has spoken. God speaks in many ways. Some laws God spoke through writing it down and giving it to Moses. Some he told Moses without writing it down. Some he relied on the wisdom of the sages to derive it from the words, from the hints that he put in the Torah. And some he relied on the sages' initiative to legislate it. But they're all part of the laws of the Torah. And this explains briefly what the oral Torah is. That was really just a brief overview of what is the oral Torah, and those are the laws which the Talmud discusses. It's myriads and hundreds and thousands of scenarios of laws reflecting every single part of life, from Shabbos and holidays and Passover and the high holidays, and how to blow the shofar and how to fast on Yom Kippur, and Purim is coming up, and the laws of agriculture and Passover, all different types of laws, books upon books. All these books that you see on my shelf are on one part and another based on the Talmud. However, that is the oral law. Any question before we do the last part of the class? Go ahead.
So with the written law, you must always have the oral to explain it, but you don't necessarily, you can have the oral separate. But with the written, you always have to have an explanation, because you were saying how much this. So
Yeah.
somebody has to tell you.
Exactly.
And that would be, but then you could have the oral without that already, yes?
Yes. So parts of the oral are sort of disconnected from the written. Like they're just laws that aren't necessarily based on the verse. But the written law can only be understood with the oral interpretation. Now, there are those that say that they don't believe the oral law. They do only the written law. What are they saying? That they have their own oral law, not our oral law. No matter what you call it, the interpretation is the oral law. And that was passed for many years. That I didn't explain this because it's really going to be next week's lesson. That was, for many years, it was actually oral. It wasn't written down. It was passed from father to son to daughter, father to son, mother to daughter. They passed the laws down orally. Maybe they wrote notes, just so they shouldn't forget. But there was no uniform work of the explanation of the Torah. We'll explain in next week's lesson what happened, what changed, how did the oral law come to be written. So today it's all written. But that is the oral law. Any other question? Does that answer your question? Very good. Any other questions? Online? Any questions from our Zoomers? Very good. Okay. Fine. So the last question we have for today is, so why is the law such a big deal, right? And now we're going to get a little mystical. What's so special about the Talmud that we started off today's lesson by describing how precious it's been to the Jewish people? If it's just a bunch of laws, anyone here is excited to study law? Judging by the excitement in this room, you're very excited. But we're not excited to study laws. What drove the Jewish people to be so obsessed with the Talmud? It kept us together. But in order for it to keep us together, there had to be something behind that motivated them to learn the Talmud. So we'll offer two answers. One answer is, and by the way, before we offer those answers, it's no, I'm going to skip that. But text number 9, 3 pillars of the world stands on: Torah, service, and acts of loving kindness. So the world stands on Torah. What's so important that the world stands on Torah, on learning, right? We're not, America doesn't stand on people studying American law, and why does Judaism stand on people studying Jewish law? What's so special about this idea of learning Jewish law? right? Maybe the focus should have been Jewish history, right? Like the Bible. I was once walking in the square in Gainesville, and one of the restaurant owners, which will remain nameless, called me in and said, Rabbi, come here. And he quoted a verse to me and said, where's that verse from? Like he's testing me. And the verse was, and God told Samuel something, something, something. And I said, well, that's a verse from Samuel. It was pretty obvious. And he said, oh, not bad for a rabbi. And he was joking, but he wasn't joking because he knew the Bible inside and out. He's obviously not Jewish, but he knows his Bible. And he knows that Jews were not more focused on studying the law. What is it about Jewish law that caused Jews to be more focused on the law? I wouldn't say more than the Bible, because really we should study Bible. We should know it as good as he knows it. But, no judgment here. I forgive myself. Could all forgive yourself too. Why are we so obsessed with law? In fact, if you look in text number 10, I go back to Maimonides. Maimonides describes study schedule. What's a proper study schedule for a scholar? He writes, the time allotted to study should be divided into 3 parts. A third should be devoted to the written law, a third to the oral law. The last third should be spent in reflection, deducing conclusions from the premises, developing implications of statements, comparing statements, studying the principles by which the Torah is interpreted, blah, blah, skip. The latter topic is called Gemara. So a third of your time should be learning Gemara, time that you study, right? And the truth is, if you continue Maimonides there, he writes that once you finish the written law, you should spend all your time learning Gemara. So when I was back in yeshiva, that's what we spent almost 10 hours a day. We were studying Talmud. That's what we were doing. And in fact, today, now we said before that the Talmud is the fatherland of the Jewish people. I take it to mean that when Jews meet each other, they always have something to talk about. They could talk about Talmud. And today there's a program which was developed right before the Holocaust that people learn half a page a day of Talmud. They finish the whole Talmud over 7 years. And then it's called Daf Yomi. You can look it up. There's podcasts and videos. There's many ways to learn the Talmud today. And at the end of the 7 years, they make a big celebration. I think first they lent it out. Most of them are Jews in New York, New Jersey. First they rented out City Field, and it got too small, and they rented out Madison Square Garden. And I think today they have to rent 2 stadiums for the celebration. They rent out MetLife Stadium. I think MetLife is bigger than, in fact, to say a story that it was a few days after this celebration. I wish I could show you a video. There's thousands of people crowded into MetLife Stadium and celebrating not football or a concert. They were celebrating a book that they studied. And a few days later, and a gentleman is driving down the New Jersey Expressway, and he's pulled over for speeding. And the state trooper comes over to him, takes one look at him. He sees him wearing the yarmulke and dressed like a religious Talmud studying Jew. And he says, "Did you read your page today?" And the guy's like, "What page?" "Your page. Did you do your page? Your Talmud page?" And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I did my Talmud page." And the state trooper says, "Yeah, I was protecting that event. I'll let you go this time, but it's not nice. If you study the Talmud, you shouldn't be doing this, speeding." So, it's a big event there. So we're really obsessed with learning. And before we finish tonight, I want to attempt to answer why. What's so special about studying law? So we'll give one answer. Is the very basic answer that when it comes to Judaism is a religion of action, right? We don't say be kind in your heart, right? If you want to be kind, you have to be kind in your hands. You can't just tell a person, I feel good for you. I'm sorry for you. You have to actually help them, right? This might be a little, no offense. I know we have people here from all over the world, but they say, what's the difference between a person from New York and a person from LA. No offense before I finish this joke, because it's the idea. We're not talking about any specific people. What they say is that if you're on the side of the road with a flat tire and you're in Los Angeles, a person will stop and say, "Oh wow, your tire is flat. I feel so sorry for you. That's so annoying. That's so unfortunate. I'm so sorry. Have a nice day." They'll be very understanding. And if you have a flat tire in New York, the New Yorker will say, "What's wrong with you, you idiot? You don't know how to drive? Here, let me help you change your tire." So we have two people. One is helpful without being nice. One is nice, but not helpful. And of course, obviously, there's exceptions to every rule. But do you know what I'm talking about? Maybe. You're from California. Anyway, but and you're from New York. Yes. But Judaism is a religion of action. You also have to be nice, but it's also a religion of action. The laws are meant to actually be kept. And because these laws cover every facet of life, we need to actually know them. So for someone who wants to follow the laws, and the laws which govern every part of your life, you need to actually constantly study them to remember them. But that's one answer. It's not the real answer. Here's the real answer. And this is where we're going to get mystical. The more mystical part of the answer. And in order to understand this answer, I want to take you back to the late 1700s to a rabbi named Rabbi Shneir Zalman Schneerson. And sorry, his name wasn't Shneir Zalman Schneerson. His name was Rabbi Shneir Zalman. His descendants' last name was Schneerson. But he was the first leader of the Chabad movement. And in 1799, he was imprisoned by the Russian Tsar for various allegations made against him. And they said that he was leading a rebellion. He wanted to be the Jewish king. And of course, the Tsar didn't like the idea of anyone else being a leader in imperialist Russia. So the Tsar imprisoned him. And then when he was in prison, they interrogated him to understand him. And the end of the story is they let him go, and he was freed, a few months later. But while he was in prison, they asked him many questions about the Jewish faith, try to understand what was his motives. So, and to give a little more background, the reason why he was in prison, unfortunately, was because other Jews convinced the Russian Tsar to imprison him. The Rabbi Shneir Zalman was a Hasidic Jew, and he was sort of introducing, together with many other rabbis, a new breath into Jewish life, to make Jewish life, invigorate Jewish life, as what became to be known as Hasidic Judaism. And there are people that felt that, we don't like new things, too progressive, and we have to stay in the way it was till now. So they gave him over to the authorities. They hoped the authorities would put an end to him. So they asked him several questions about the Hasidic Jewish way of life. And one of the questions they asked him is, what's the idea of learning Torah? What's the idea of prayer? So in text number 12, we have a letter from Rabbi Schneerson, which he wrote to the authorities to explain his view of divine service. So Isaac, can you read for us text number 12?
Yeah, double service. That was referred to in our Russian languages, Boga Molizia, divine service, is divided by all of us Jews into two parts. The first is the reading and studying of the scriptures, Talmud, Midrashim, and their commentaries, as well as the study of the legal codes that summarize the laws of the Talmud. Second aspect is the concept of prayer.
Thank you, Isaac. What's very interesting about the letter you just read is how Rabbi Schneerson, again, Rabbi Shneir, described divine service. He described learning as a divine service, which is unusual, right? Where we would think that a religious divine service is prayer, maybe, burning incense. I'm joking about that, but something spiritual, studying laws is not a spiritual activity, right? That's just a utilitarian. Did I pronounce that? I did. Wow, good for me. But it's the idea of it's just something you need to do in order to know how to practice the laws. But it's not a spiritual experience, right? If you want to know how to pray, you have to learn how to read Hebrew or what the prayers mean. But it's not spirit. You're not actually praying, right? If you're learning the laws of prayer, like when do we pray and what do we say when we pray? Are you praying? No, you're when you pray, that's spiritual. Is learning a spiritual experience? The Rabbi Schneier says, yes, it's a spiritual experience. Why is it a spiritual experience? So the answer is as follows. When you understand someone else's idea, you are actually connecting to that originator of that idea in a very deep way. So if Steve over here was to come up with a philosophy or an invention, and we would all sit down and study your philosophy, we would connect to you very deeply. You know why? Because we'd be in your brain. There's no connection higher than being in someone else's brain or having their thoughts in our brain. So an intellectual union, the same Rabbi Schneerson describes it as the highest union of all. There's no greater, there's the union of maybe loving someone, holding hands, but that's our bodies, right? It's one hand touching another hand, but there's two separate bodies. You could share your feelings with each other, but if you understand someone else, that is the highest union, right? Like twins that just, they could talk, they have these, I don't know if it's real or a myth, but twins that could, I don't know if we have any twins here, they could sense what their twin is saying or about to say or thinking. Like that is the highest union. And studying the Torah is studying God's mind. So it's an experience where we become one with God in a sense, because even more than prayer. Prayer is there's me and I'm asking God for something or I'm praising God. Study is that I'm inserting God into my brain. And that's text 13, which is the same Rabbi Schneier. This is not already a letter to the Russian authorities. This is what he wrote in his own work of Jewish thought. Jacob, can you read for us? Text
Halacha
13.
is God's wisdom and will. For so it arose is in God's will that if, for example, Reuben pleads in one way and Simeon in another, the verdict should be such and such. Now, is it possible that this particular litigation never occurred in reality? Nor is it ever destined to be presented for judgment as these precise disputes and claims? Nevertheless, God's will and wisdom has determined that in the event of a person pleading this way and the other litigant pleading that way, the verdict shall be such and such. Accordingly, when we study and understand and properly comprehend with our intellect the details of such a scenario in accordance with the law presented in the Mishnah, Gemara, or Psukim, the latter codes, we have thereby comprehended, grasped, and encompassed with our intellect the will and wisdom of God. We have effectively understood something of the one whom no thought can grasp, and whose will and wisdom are beyond understanding, until they are invested within the laws that have been set out for us.
Yeah. That is Rabbi Schneer's view on the study of Torah. And this, I think, explains what was the motivations of all these people throughout the ages, our grandparents and great-grandparents that would, after a long, hard day of work, would pull down a book off the shelf and study. They weren't doing it because they needed to know something that they didn't know. Maybe they did. But more importantly, for them, it was the experience of connecting to God. Now, it's not, hallelujah, like you feel it. When you're learning, you have to be learning. You have to question and ask. But this was their motivation. So that's mystic thought number one. here is, oh, we have a nice graphic here. 1 hour of study, 1 hour with God. Here's mystic thought number 2. Another point is text 14, which is also from Rabbi Shneur Zalman. And this is another angle to understand the mystical aspect, the mystical motivation to study Torah. Deanne Sue, could you read for us text 14 on page 25?
Butchers and scholars. A butcher who chops an animal's limbs into pieces and processes its innards is nothing more than a butcher. By contrast, someone who occupies themselves with understanding the specific details of Jewish law, I can't read this. My contacts are going out. Associated with the limbs of the animal, laws that facilitate the ability to distinguish between an animal that is kosher for consumption and one that is disqualified. That person is revealing and clarifying the divine will and wisdom.
That was a piece of Jewish mysticism. And thank you for reading that. You read it great. And you got all the words right. And what was the message of that paragraph? This ties into the idea that the goal of Judaism is, many people are familiar with the words, tikkun olam, to rectify the world. Kabbalah understands it mean that in addition to, of course, doing our best that the world should be a place that's good for everyone, it also means to elevate the world and infuse it with godliness. So every time we do a mitzvah, we give charity, we light Shabbat candles, we put on tefillin, we eat kosher, we do something that God told us to do or help someone else, that physical part of the world is now elevated and becomes godly. How do we do that? Through studying Torah. Because whenever we study Torah, and we may be discussing the laws of cows, right? The laws of which cows are kosher and which cows are not kosher. Or what happens if the cow has an injury in its lung? There's a hole in the cow's lung. Does that make the cow too sick that you can't call it a kosher cow? Because in order for a cow to be kosher, it has to be healthy. If it's not healthy, you can't eat it. When you're studying that, you're actually elevating in a spiritual, metaphysical way all the energies of cows and bulls in the world. So another motivation why they were studying all these laws and why is it a divine service? Because it elevates the mundane.
Lesson 1.
Oh, 1 second. All right. Any questions? Very good. Everyone here has completely accepted what I say. I rest my case. Any questions from the people online? Very good. So this
question.
we have a question.
On page 28,
Go ahead.
there's a graphic that what is law? And it shows the philosophical perspective, the utilitarian approach, the midrashic parable, the Kabbalistic doctrine, and the Hasidic insight. What's the difference between these?
So what you're referring to, first of all, is every lesson has a supplement that we're not going to read this in class. Class. It's not really a class. I'm not really a teacher. This is a group study, but apologize for that. But it's it just gives you extra food for thought.
Okay.
So I guess if you read it, you know the difference.
Between the Kabbalistic
Oh, because
doctrine
right afterwards it goes
and
through.
the Hasidic insight. What's the difference
That
between
last
those
one?
two?
Very good. Hassidicism and Kabbalah are not the same. Kabbalah is more like the study describing
mystical.
Exactly. It describes the mystical makeup of the world, and Hasidus is to take that mystical makeup and make it relevant and practical. So it uses different language.
There's insight, I guess.
Exactly. Doctrine and insight. But that's just more food for thought. And with this, we concluded tonight's class. And over the next 5, what would we do today? We just covered very briefly what is Talmudic law and what is the oral law. Why was it important? Why is it a Talmud? For the next 5 weeks, we'll be discussing in depth what's the history of the Mishnah, the people of the Mishnah, the people of the Gemara, and we'll actually be able to experience studying it inside. So we won't just talk about it, we'll actually study it inside and together. For those of you that are joining us, I look forward to seeing you next week. And for those who are just trying it out, I hope to see you next week. If not, it was great to see you today. Show you a quick video which just summarizes the class. In case when I was in class, I would just sometimes only watch these videos. So in case we have anyone like that, here we go.
Lesson 1. The Jewish People and the Talmud. 1. The Talmud has influenced every facet of Jewish culture. Its study has been and remains a source of joy for Jewish communities worldwide. One historian suggested that the Talmud is responsible for the Jews having survived their long exile. 2. The Talmud is primarily a record of halacha, Jewish law, which covers every facet of Jewish life, thereby allowing Jews to connect with God in whatever they are doing. 3. Although the written Torah is a source of Jewish law, the vast majority of Jewish law is not explicitly recorded in it. God taught these laws orally to Moses when he gave us the entirety of the Torah at Mount Sinai. 4. In addition to laws received by Moses directly from God, the oral law contains laws that were derived by the sages from the Torah's text, as well as laws legislated by the sages over the generations. 5. The famous Jewish devotion to learning is rooted in the tremendous spiritual significance attributed to Torah study, to the extent that it is considered one of the 3 pillars on which the world stands. Although most Jews are not lawyers or judges, the study of Talmud, Jewish law, occupies a large portion of traditional Jewish study. 6. Jews view the study of law as a mode of religious worship because the laws are the will and wisdom of God. When we absorb Torah law with our minds, we are bonding with a sliver of the divine mind. 7. When we study a Torah law on a given subject, we bring the divine wisdom contained in that law into contact with that subject. And since Jewish law's scope is so broad and that it encompasses every facet of our lives, studying halacha brings holiness into every facet of our lives.
All right. I want to mention this for a moment. This course is dedicated in memory of Rabbi Levi Volosov. Rabbi Levi Volosov was a rabbi in Manalapan, New Jersey. He's connected to Atlanta. His wife's brothers all live in Atlanta. And a few days ago, literally Sunday, I believe, he just collapsed and passed away. He left behind 8 children, 6 biological children and 2 adopted children. Believed there were 2 children that lost their parents, and he just took them into his home. And he was one of the presenters of JLI, and so all the chapters of JLI, this right now we're one of 400 different classes happening all over the world. So all those classes are dedicated to his memory. And it'd be good for his soul. If you want to continue discussing any of the subjects we have here, so there's a link here, myjli.com/Talmud. I'll send it all to all of you in the email, together with a recording of this class, in case you miss my voice so much and you want to hear it again. It's recorded, or if you need something to fall asleep to tonight, we provide that. It's a free service. And with that, we conclude today's lesson. Pardon?
Like the Polish maid.
Exactly. My wife will definitely fall asleep to this, but she's upstairs. She's watching the kids. Thank you, Shayna, for allowing us to have this class here. And with that, we conclude. Anyone on Zoom want to say something before I turn it off? Very good. best students are always on Zoom.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And hope to see you all next week. And if you want to join next week, let me know. We'll make it happen. All the best. And I will end the recording.